Hey everybody, welcome to Chapter 2 of Berwick Saga. Or rather, not quite Chapter 2 just yet, because we still have a few things to do still in Chapter 1 before we progress to Chapter 2. Most of this stuff is item management. In particular, I'm going to be storing my materials in the storage area rather than keeping them on my units. But we're also going to pick up one mercenary before we move on to the next chapter, even though there are no more battles in this chapter, and so that seems kind of pointless. The reason for this is that it's keeping the happiness mechanic for mercenaries in mind. We're going to be picking up Ruby, and in order to permanently recruit her, she needs to reach 11 happiness. Recruiting a mercenary adds half a point of happiness each time. And the price of a mercenary is halved after the main mission, but also if you hired them in the previous chapter without ever deploying them. So by doing it this way around, that means I can get her 2 happiness boosts from being hired, for the same price as if I didn't hire her now, and then hired her at the start of Chapter 2. Speaking of permanent recruitment requirements, I have decided that I'm going to try and plan for full recruitment, and that means looking up recruitment requirements in advance. So you can feel free to talk about recruitment requirements for any units that I have already seen from now on. Now, if you do happen to be a Ruby fan, I have good news and bad news for you, because I am going to be hiring Ruby a lot in order to meet her recruitment requirements. But the bad news is that I am going to be complaining about her a lot as well, because her starting stats are absolutely terrible, and she has some really steep requirements in a full recruitment run. But I'll go over that in a minute, because right now we are going to move on and advance to Chapter 2. The first thing we do in Chapter 2 is ransom Desard, whom we captured in the previous map, back to the enemy for a small amount of gold. Money is really quite tight for me at this point in the run, and so this extra cash from getting lucky and capturing him is much appreciated. The next thing that we do is view a large number of cutscenes. These are activating civilian requests, which are essentially extra side objectives in the main mission of each chapter. I want to try and complete as many of these as I possibly can, because they give some pretty good rewards, in addition to gradually reducing the cost of items from the shops in town, which is really handy. Next up, I have some horses to replace. Reese and Ward are going to be deployed again because we're back to a main mission now, and so they both need horses in order to keep up. And for Reese in particular, he needs the extra movement in an LTC run. Because Reese isn't going to be seeing much combat, I bought him one of the more expensive horses with more HP, because he's not going to take all that much damage, hopefully, and that means that his horse is going to last him a while. So we may as well make it a fairly durable horse to get even more out of that for free. And that just leaves us with rehiring our mercenaries. I probably didn't need to rehire Ruby right now because she's not being deployed in this map. But I don't believe that the price halving stacks when you rehire after not deploying in a chapter and after the main mission, so I may as well do it here to save time later on. The units we actually want to hire for the upcoming map are Volo, Axel, and Dean, who all have happiness requirements, and Axel in particular has some very important skills for the upcoming map. We also rehire Silvis for pretty much the same reasons as in the last chapter. Having 2 range is extremely helpful for certain strategies. And additionally, in order to permanently recruit her, we need to get her to level 10, and that means deploying her and getting kills on her. So, moving on. The map that we are currently playing is a seas mission, so Reese is going to have to do quite a lot of walking, and we want to clear his way as much as possible. So we're going to be deploying the usual array of mercenaries to boost their happiness stats, as well as Leon and Adel, who are reliable in tandem with each other. Ward is also here, but he actually ended up being surprisingly reasonably superfluous during this clear, so yeah, maybe I should have swapped him for Ruby. On turn 1, some new units appear from a cave on the far side of the map. These are Zine, who is a thief, and Kramer and Faye, who are both infantry sword users. They appear in a very convenient location because they are able to immediately start fighting their way through some of the enemies on the far side of the map from our deployment zone, including several sub-bosses. In their dialogue, these 3 units actually give a small hint towards the location of one of the civilian request side objectives that we need to deal with. Speaking of civilian requests, Leon is deathmatching an enemy in order to free up a house tile that is part of another civilian request chain. We're going to visit that in a couple of turns' time in order to advance that thing. Faye is about to do something, so let's have a quick talk about her. She has a pseudo-personal weapon called a cutlass, which has the same effect as the Night Sword, which allows her to get kills in situations where other units wouldn't. Most personal weapons in this game are not strictly locked to the unit that they're personal for. Instead, they're a bit more like Aura and Excalibur in the DS Fire Emblem games, where any other unit can use them if they have a sufficiently high weapon rank, or in this case, level. Specifically, the Cutlass has a weapon rank of 20, so anyone level 20 or higher can use it without a failure rate, while Faye can do that at any level. She just used her Cutlass to pick off one of the mini-bosses in this map, and this guy had a weapon equipped called a Sword Breaker, which has a 1 in 3 chance of breaking the target's equipped sword if it connects. Fortunately, Kramer managed to avoid the effect activating on him, and Faye finished him off with 2 hits at sub 50% hit rates in order to make the Swordbreaker a complete non-issue for the remainder of the map. There are quite a lot of other named sub-bosses on this map, and one of them is Mounted, riding on the other side of the river to harry us with his bow. This is Pizarro, and we want to kill him because he has one of our sign-on stallions as a droppable item. My horse budget has been under a lot of strain so far in the run because I keep getting Leon and Adel's horses killed, and having the sign-on stallion, which is much more durable than thin horses, is going to help me with that quite a bit. Axel is making use of his swimmer skill in order to cut to the chase and go directly across the river towards some of the side objectives. In order for us to get to these side objectives that he's going for with any of our other units, they would have to go the whole way around the map, crossing the river at the shallows, and because this is a seas map, trying to do that would likely cost turns. So having Axel free to do it straight away is just really nice. Our turn is pretty much over, with nothing really relevant other than Dean somehow managing to miss both of his desperation attacks, which is really annoying. I mean, Dean, you want to get kills. But really, there's quite a lot of dead time during this map where nothing interesting is happening, and this is the first instance of that. So the next interesting thing to note about the strategy is that Axel is going to be going into the forest down in the south of the map, and because of that he's going to be activating his hide skill. I talked about hide briefly in map 1-1, and it works for the player as well. I believe it and the Fog of War mechanic are very similar. So if you walk into a hidden enemy, you'll initiate a round of combat where the enemy gets to attack first, and usually Axel will not be able to be targeted. There is an exception though that I will cover later. Volo's role in this chapter is to head directly north on a solo mission to one of the other side objectives up in the northern part of the map. He demonstrates his value here by counterattacking an enemy who is attacking him at 1 range, even though he has a 0 range weapon equipped. And he is able to do this because his attack speed is sufficiently high. I forget what the exact cutoff is, I think it's 10 or 11. Another thing to note is that there is a crippled enemy dragging his feet across the map, and I'm going to have Faye capture him because that gives her free experience. The reason I want Faye to get this is that she is one of the 4 units in the game who needs to reach level 10 in order to be permanently recruited. So obviously giving her absolutely free kills like this is always a good idea. This does mean that she is the one who receives the enemy's bag with 4 vulneraries inside it, but we can trade those off her without having to rehire her, so that's alright in the end. There is one enemy outlaw on the southern side of the river who is a real pain. He is about to have a go at Adel and kill his horse again. So this guy has sniper arrows, which are irritating because they give plus 50 to the hit rate, and that makes them far more accurate than the attacks that I've been used to dealing with, because it's difficult to dodge tank against them. Luckily he only has 3 of those rather than the full 10, but it's still a real pain for my strategy here. To be completely honest, I should probably start resetting when I make mistakes that cost me a horse, because as I mentioned earlier, horses are the biggest drain on my budget at this moment. Sylvis is attacked by Pizarro here. She is able to counterattack him, and she procs Maim again, but unfortunately this time she doesn't manage to get the free cripple, so he is free to still ride around and harry us for future turns. Thanks to Adel weakening one of these enemies, Reese is able to pick up a kill here, but I should have really been aware of the sniper arrow outlaw when deciding where to move afterwards, because I could have cantoed up 1 space, and that would have put Reese out of the way, so his horse would have remained undamaged. Instead he's going to get shot at. Although I guess it's not as much of a problem for him due to his horse's higher durability. So a few critical hits have happened on this map so far. I believe this is the first time that I've seen them in a final recording, so we should probably discuss those. In this game, critical hits add a random number of damage between 10 and 20. If you are familiar with Fire Emblem Heroes, you'll probably be aware of the concept of true damage, which is damage that is added after taking into account the enemy's defenses. And in this game, the extra damage from critical hits is true damage in that sense. So it's always going to happen even if the opponent has really high defenses or blocks with their shield. On the other hand, it is really difficult to get listed critical in this game because you need at least 50 in the appropriate weapon skill to get some without a weapon that boosts critical naturally, like Reese's rapier. On this turn, we have Zine and Reese talk to each other. This is an important thing to do because you have to do this talk conversation in order to permanently recruit Zine in the next map. Kramer and Faye also have talk conversations with Reese, but they do not use the talk command. Similarly to the conversation we saw with Dean back in chapter 1, they get to converse just by waiting next to each other, which is interesting. I guess it makes the one that's actually important stand out from the rest by making it use the talk command. At this point, there is still another mid-boss near where Faye and Kramer are waiting around, and so Kramer is going to move down in an attempt to bait him out. Kramer is another one of the units who needs to reach level 10 in order to be permanently recruited, but he starts at level 3 rather than level 1, so he has a bit more leeway there. Sylvis continues to face off against Pizarro, but she's not going to have a good time. She somehow manages to keep missing, despite the fact that I chose to use the more accurate Steel Arrow Plus, rather than the bronze arrows that she's also carrying around. And she misses not just once, but twice, because Pizarro ends up attacking her on his turn as well. His Canto leaves him out of Silvus's range for any subsequent turn, and so I use a different strategy to finish him off, moving Axel over to kill him with an even lower percent hit. The unfortunate consequence of this that I didn't realize immediately is that by taking an action while adjacent to an enemy unit, Axel fails to activate the hide skill despite being on appropriate terrain, and that is going to have some consequences in short order, because Axel is now very close to the main boss's area. Now, if you've been paying attention, you have probably noticed a green arrow pointing off the map over near Faye and Zine and Kramer's starting position. If you put a unit onto this arrow, they can depart the map. I really don't understand why there is an escape point on this map, because to me it feels like it's just something that could trick you into thinking it was the objective, and then you'd be really disappointed when you were just sending your units off the map when they still had things to do. The enemy outlaw uses up his last sniper arrow on Leon here, so that concern is finally out of the way, but this does leave both Leon and his horse on pretty low HP. So that guy definitely did his job at draining my resources. I'm about to see the punishment for Axel's failure to hide, because another of the mid-bosses, a man named Valentin, is about to move over and attack Axel, whereas I really wanted him to be moving to the right towards my better combat units. Killing or capturing Valentin is a side objective on this map. If you achieve it, you get a monetary reward once you get back into town, which is twice as big if you successfully capture him. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to reliably capture enemies in this game because it requires crippling, which generally requires you to injure them first, and Silvus is nowhere near Valentin to come in and assist with maim. So we're going to have to settle for the lower reward amount here, but that's okay because it's still a fair amount of gold. Taking the hit from Valentin means that Axel is less equipped to deal with the remaining combat that he needs to see on this chapter. The first of those is going to be chasing the side objective. Silvus visited the house above the river some time ago, and so Axel is now able to visit the house below the river and face off against another named mini-boss who was hiding in the house. Despite Axel's fairly low hit rate, he ends up successfully connecting his first 2 attacks in a row to kill this mini-boss and claim the item that we were asked to retrieve for one of the civilian requests. This mechanic of a unit hiding in a house was also used in the house that I failed to visit back in Chapter 1. One interesting thing I did notice on rewatching this clear is the way my luck seems to swing back and forth to pretty major extremes. Starting with Faye and Kramer managing to take out the Swordbreaker boss with no problems, then Dean missing a bunch of attacks, Silvus missing a bunch of attacks, and now Axel hitting 3 mid-50s hit rates in a row, and it continues a little bit later on. Anyway, we have managed to pull out the remaining sub-boss in the lower right with Kramer, and we are going to be fighting him on this upcoming turn. Despite my best efforts, even using Faye's Sunder skill for some extra crit rate against him, he manages to survive the turn, but that's okay because we're able to deal with him next turn pretty easily. Reese, meanwhile, has finally reached the river and is attempting to cross it, but this is difficult while he is mounted because all of these tiles cost 4 spaces in order for him to enter them. You might think that dismounting would remedy this somewhat, but unfortunately Reese dismounts into a night movement class, and that has a 3-tile cost for each tile of water or shallows that we have to go through. And that, with his 4 movement, means that he still can only manage to move 1 tile every turn. This terrain has the end result of letting a bunch of my infantry units catch up to Reese and overtake him to assist him in his fight against the last few enemies on the map. Ward is also unable to make best use of his high movement across these tiles, and it's quite possible that I should have undeployed him in favor of a mercenary who needs some extra happiness. Volo has finally reached one of the side objectives up north, the hidden item. Unfortunately, the other side objective that he's up there for has not yet arrived on the map, so he's going to be waiting around up there for another turn or 2 before his role is finished. Faye manages to pick up a level up from doing her second mid-boss kill of the map, and she gets HP and defense from the level up, which is exactly the opposite of what I would normally expect from someone of her class archetype. So good job, Faye, please keep doing that. Kramer is now turning his attention to the problem of dealing with Valentine. He's moving over in such a way that Valentine will rush over to attack him, leaving Axel alone because Axel is now hidden again. And Kramer is luckily able to dodge Valentine's first swing and get a little bit of chip-in on him. Valentine is carrying a concoction which restores a ridiculous 40 HP, so we want to try and kill him as quickly as possible without giving him an opportunity to use that. Meanwhile, Dean is using a vulnerary in order to restore his health a bit. This is not the last vulnerary he's going to have to use on this map, because he needs as much single hit bulk as possible for something that he does right at the end. Attacking Valentine with Scene was probably not my smartest move ever, but I never said that I always play perfectly, and so Scene manages to get whacked right down to 5 HP. With a bit of luck she'll be okay, but you know, maybe don't do that if you're following along. Axel is now going to enter a second house. If you've been paying attention, there's been a little white sparkle on that tile going the whole map, and that indicates that this is a tile where Axel is able to use the search skill in order to find an item. Often these items are guarded by enemies, such as in this case, but Axel is more than capable of continuing his streak of landing mid-50s hit rates in order to kill him in a single blow and take this item. Volo takes a kill, which may seem pointless because he's not gaining any experience points whatsoever from these. But it does have a purpose because it gives us a bit of money and that guy drops a longbow. Plus, additionally, anytime Volo uses a sword, he has a chance to increase his sword skill. So, you know, that's something at least. Volo's target finally appears on the map at the start of turn 7, but we are going to focus on dealing with Valentine first. He is going to be a tricky beast, but we have the old reliable skills for dealing significant damage. Dean's Desperation, and of course Leon's Deathmatch. Valentine also acted quite early in this turn, so there is no risk of him using his concoction to completely erase all of the damage that we are doing. Ideally, I want to have as many supporting units for Leon in range as possible before taking on a boss who's less strong. However, only Reese is able to get in range, because we need to keep him moving forward 1 space every turn in order to get the lowest turn count on this map. It's pretty annoying that this is the case, because Adel is the far better supporter for Leon due to giving 20 hit instead of just 10, as well as the 4 critical that could give some extra reliability. But we gotta do what we gotta do. Sadly, the deathmatch leaves both Leon and his horse at pretty low HP, so he gets targeted by the remaining brigand, and his horse dies. He really is not having great luck with horses in this run, is he? And this is where my luck swings back to bad, because Kramer manages to miss his attack to deal significant damage to the brigand, leaving him alive for another turn. Next up, Volo is finally going to complete the objective that we sent him north for. He is going to kill the final named mid-boss in this map and receive a ring that was lost by one of the civilians back in town. And that's going to complete our third and final civilian request on this map. At this point, all that's left is tidying up the remaining enemy and then dealing with the boss. But that's going to be quite challenging, because most of my units that are close to this final enemy have fairly low remaining hit points. So we have to rely quite a lot on dodging. And because he is on terrain, he is going to be relying a lot on dodging too. And we are going to have a fairly hard time hitting him. Fortunately, he decides that running off the terrain in order to have a go at Kramer is the best play here, but we still have to face the problem of having to deal with our low HP when approaching him. Dean in particular, using Desperation, means that he is guaranteed to die if he gets counterattacked. But fortunately, the enemy's HP is low enough after his tangle with Kramer that Dean is able to one-shot him from his remaining health, so I decide Desperation is the way to go here. So there's really nothing left to talk about except the final boss of this map. This guy's name is Bennington, and he has a status symbol floating above his head, which represents the battle cry status. He has been using the battle cry skill quite a lot over the last few turns, and the effects of this skill are to grant +3 attack and plus a large amount of hit. I don't remember exactly what it is offhand. And the thing about this is that it stacks with itself up to 6 times. So Bennington is now rocking a terrifyingly high attack stat, with 100 listed hit against pretty much all of our units. So I have to find a way to deal with that, and what I worked out is absolutely hilarious in my opinion. Anyway, Kramer and Faye are both taking the opportunity to get their talk conversations with Reese out of the way. I don't know if these are of any consequence at all, but I decided to get them done just to be on the safe side. With the arrival of turn 9, Reese is finally able to escape the horrible terrain that he has been slogging through for the last 4 or 5 turns, and that means that this map is almost over. You might think that it's odd that I haven't even started to wear the boss down yet, given that this is a siege map and so Reese has to occupy that space. But don't worry, I have a plan, and it's a good one. In order for it to work though, Dean needs a second vulnerary use, so I spent the effort to have Zine trade one over to him on this turn. So we're pretty much done on this turn, but unfortunately this video is going to have its length padded out because some reinforcements have been spawning near Volo, and he is forced to fight them on their turns, which is kind of annoying and sort of detracts from the strategy, but you know, we just kind of have to do it. And then turn 10 rolls around, and with it, the fabled turn 10 save point that I can finally confirm exists. I'm grateful that it's here, because I do need to rig something on the final turn in order to finish the map in style. Now, if you will remember back in chapter 1, Reese had to dismount in order to seize the building tile that the boss had been occupying. In this map, the boss is also occupying some kind of building, but this is treated as a fort tile instead, and mounted units are perfectly able to walk on those. and that ends up saving me a turn here. And what else is going to save me a turn is moving Dean down to fight the boss. Thanks to the interleaved turns, I don't have to kill the boss on turn 9 for a turn 10 seize, and I can use a pseudo enemy phase strategy. In this case, the boss is going to attack, and then Dean is going to activate his skill Vengeful, which has a damage taken times 3% chance to attack even when you've taken damage, and it adds the damage taken to the might of that attack. And that allows Dean to instantly one-hit KO this boss and pick up a level up from it. And so that leaves the fort free for Reese to seize and complete this extremely long map in 10 turns. Thanks for sticking it out, and I'll see you next time.